Hello, everyone. You're listening to TruthCat Radio at truthcatradio.com. The current time is 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's East Coast, USA. I myself am Richard Kary, broadcasting out of Chicago, USA, and this is Beyond the Matrix. Well, thank you, everyone who tuned in tonight. I did want to mention that we do accept most all of our funding through our station support page, and that's what pays for everything. We don't accept any corporate advertising whatsoever. We are not doing any sort of monetizing of any of our archives. They're all free to you. But that being said, everything that keeps the station going is from your continued support. So if you could, on our support page, we have PayPal, which is a very convenient way for everyone. A lot of people like the ease of PayPal transactions, and we could really use the funding right now, folks. It's about that time again, and there's a lot of expenses to just keep these basic services here. We have a lot of amazing information we always share with you, a lot of great hosts, a lot of great guests. And yeah, but we do definitely need your help. So please, if you could, with whatever you could possibly spare, sometimes from the end of the week or, once or so a month, you might have a little extra something that you're sure, okay, I could give this bit at least, and any little bit helps us. I can't say that enough. A lot of people are like, oh, well, I just have a couple of dollars this week, this month. That's great. I mean, anything and everything is greatly appreciated. No donation is too small, and a lot of times those little extra bits help keep us in the black, so to speak, and keep everyone paid up and happy to keep our services running to you here at TruthCat Radio, because it is a battle out there. The corporate media would love to shut down any and all voices of the independent media, especially ones like ours here. TruthCat Radio with Stephen D. Kelly and all of the hosts he seeks out here have very high standards, and the establishment just hates people like us. They just despise us, And so, they would love for us to all get shut down based on just not enough support or whatever means necessary. So, that being said, please help out, and we love and appreciate all of you and your support for that. And please, Facebook is the primary means of us promoting, just about everything for all of our shows. So please join our Facebook group and like our pages. We have a TruthCat Radio, and then there's also pages for the shows. Like I have a page for Beyond the Matrix. We have a great TruthCat news group for you all to join. We love sharing, a lot of information through that and networking with a lot of people. That's actually a good way. We introductorily networked there with Mr. Graham Sutherland and his The Real Worldwide Truth Movement, which also has a great following in its own right. And the TruthCat Radio page, especially, please like and share that. It's where we have all of the up-to-date information for the shows, topics, guests, all of the places that you need to go to get more of this information. If anyone would like to call in tonight, I'm interested in hearing what you guys have to say. We don't always have time with all the topics we try to cover when we have a lot of these guests on here to have many callers call in. And, this is one of those moments I'd be able to fit in a little more discussion, some of your feedback. We really do all appreciate that, all of the hosts here. We love to hear from you guys. We want to hear your thoughts, what you have to say, any stories or related topics to anything we've covered that you think might be of interest, or questions you might have. I, Stephen, someone here who's quite knowledgeable of a given topic could at least give you a response that could satisfy some of your inquiry. And some people just like to call, to show their support, and to say hi. And we welcome more casual calls as well. That call-in number will be 714-598-3125. Again, the call-in number is 714-598-3125. Please be sure to turn off your radio when you do call on in. Don't say anything when in the call-in queue. I'll just verbally invite you to speak by your area code. And once again, please help out and support the station with whatever you can. Now then, I just wanted to do a little promotion there for the show's funding, the station's funding rather. Because we, as I said, Truth Cat Radio every so often, it comes time to get all the payments up to date for our facilities here. But today we are.
I just want to interrupt just for a moment to give a shout out to Wolf Spirit Radio. Okay, it looks like I believe it looks to me like we were being picked up by Wolf Spirit Radio, so I want to give a shout out to all the listeners on Wolf Spirit Radio. That's it. Carry on.
Okay, yeah, I do as well. I'm giving a shout out to all you guys listening through Wolf Spirit Radio, and we do appreciate the simulcast. So thank you to all of you over there who are part of getting all of this out there to everyone. We do appreciate the added listenership and support. And this airing, I want to discuss the debt in its various forms and how it affects our lives. Now, much of this is a result of policies which the majority of us have no control over, amplifying wealth inequality, intended to make the wealthiest richer and the rest of the population inevitably poorer. The economic gains are mostly being concentrated in the hands of a tiny percentage of the population, the so-called globalist elite. So I've titled the theme for tonight, Debt Superstar U.S.A., because that really is what it comes down to for the ordinary everyday citizens. It's a lose-lose situation for us as this country's government props itself up by short selling everyone and everything around it. Now, I know this country isn't the only enemy of the people. By far, they're not alone. But this is where I am based, and a lot of the statistics for this information I've gathered here is based on the West and America, and namely America in particular. So that's what my focus is to a good extent. Of course, a lot of this comes down to the private central banks at the top. It's a subject you never get to hear much about in the corporate media. It's a taboo subject. They love you to think that they're one in one with your nation itself. That's why they have that word federal. But they're no more federal than Federal Express. Okay, the Federal Reserve is, just to clarify to everyone, it's a privately owned organization looking out for its own private interests. And they're generally at odds with the everyday citizenry as a whole. Now, the global debt, in this figure, I was really surprised when I came across the other day here. Currently, it is estimated the global debt has exploded to 325% of global gross domestic product. Okay, so that's everything. Let's say in a year's time. It's usually how these are calculated. So everyone on the globe produces in 1 year. Okay, the wealth equivalent of that, you multiply that by 3.25 times. Okay, 325%. 3.25 times that in debt every year. No, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to tell you that something is wrong with that equation. I mean, these are not long-term sustainable figures. They're not even short-term sustainable figures. These are ridiculous figures. And why does everyone let this continue? Well, if some of you saw the topic for my show tonight and were like, finance, debt, maybe I'll tune in, then you've already explained and answered what the problem is. People don't want to know about this stuff. People don't want to know about finance. People don't want to, I mean, it just reeks of math and figures and analytical, tedious sort of balancing, weighing, calculating that just is a big turnoff for anyone and everyone, I mean, they have their work they do from I don't know, whatever hours they keep for their work week. And then they have some free time to themselves. They might try to get in some of the independent media like us here at Truth Cat Radio that you might tune into. But, the last thing you want is a bunch of math, a bunch of numbers, a bunch of information about finance in your face. And yeah, that is what the sad reality is for most of the population. I say sad reality because it makes it that much more easy for us to be manipulated. I've actually been a tax preparer professionally for a handful of years on and off. And in that regard as well, I can see that, if you take a little time to look at this information, it's really not so intimidating or complicated. But so many people don't want to be bothered with so many of these things that it's easy for those who write and create and maintain the system to take advantage off that ignorance and lack of attention. But I mean, that is what we've been seeing across the globe, growing exponentially. I mean, we've always had the ruling class take advantage of the rest of the population. The majority of the population have always been indentured servants to the few, but the scale to which the manipulation occurred and the wealth inequality was never as pronounced, other than, maybe perhaps in the royal families, being significantly higher up than the rest. But I mean, we have developed more and more of a caste system financially in the West with no middle in recent times here. And I mean, showing that over 3 times what we produce in a year is owed in debt for that year. Well, someone's borrowing, ridiculous sums of money. And it turns out average people, they especially in the current economy, they're not wanting to take out loans they can't repay. Ordinary people actually like to, honor their debts, basically, and be people of their word. It's these institutions, it's on larger scales that all of this is actually created. When the banks go broke, the losses are dumped on the American worker in this country. We have adjustments made. The value of the currency, though, is a reflection of this. What you can buy, what your spending power is for the dollar you earn, is where it is stolen from you. Now, that's what it really all comes down to. The economic gains are mostly being concentrated in the hands of a tiny percentage of the population. I'm trying to bring this information out more tonight to get everyone a little more enlightened. Share the information with others more, Eventually it will be a chain reaction where if you have enough people informed to a well enough degree on a given topic, they cannot be fooled any longer into the future. I'd like to see us get to a point where that can be a reality even regarding our financial system. Perhaps that's a lofty goal, It's probably the strongest hotspot for corruption on the planet is in the financial sector, because that really is where the wealthiest stay that way and keep us all in poverty. And of course, we need to be kept that way to be distracted. I mean, this sole push toward globalism is trying to bring everyone equally down to a level of just barely getting by. As long as everyone is constantly doing that, then you don't really have to worry about your corruption getting found out. It's really the largest threat to any system is the people who have enough spare time left over to look into these things, to try to right more of the wrongs in their local, state, and federal government. The middle class has always been the largest threat to the establishment. And this is a society that's trying to just do away with that middle class altogether. Unfortunately, it so far has been making progress, but it seems they're getting unrealistic with their goals, and that's their weak point. We've become, by necessity, we've all become masters of survival and hanging on, while they have only become, well, more greedy and lazy as time has gone on, and things cannot go their way forever. I mean, just looking at some of these statistics, it's already like virtually at a breaking point. And that's a positive thing, because I mean, we've already been living in a wartime economy here. As I said, I want this information to be empowering, I mean, we don't want people to be manipulated any longer. The last year of relatively equal gains for all of the workers, the mass of Americans as a whole, to be in line with the system was about the end of the 70s. Last year of relatively equal gains in income was about 1979, according to a lot of these charts. Beginning in 1980, we've started experiencing a drop in real median family income. While the gains from technology and financial sectors accrued to those, I mean, they did still exist, but it was people who had ownership of assets, access to cheap credit, and basically, came from a privileged class already. These are the people who would start only benefiting, really starting in around the 80s, and the rest of us, didn't see that benefit from our work anymore. But before that, it was actually, I mean, the two were staying neck and neck with each other for quite some time there. It wasn't all that bad. Now, most of these charts and graphs for this data are spanning post-war, like 1947 to about present day. Some end at 2012, but and the shares of gross domestic income. Now that's compensation of employees paid wage and salary accruals, just basically disbursements to people. Now those shares of gross domestic income are showing a 46-year downtrend. Okay, I mean, for 46 years straight, it's been decreasing. And that's completely at odds with productivity levels, which have been going up for the wealthiest to be benefiting from. So this 46-year downtrend, it's showed, well, I mean, there have been some spikes upward, what they call bubbles, because it's based on hearsay, speculation, propaganda, really, that can get things overvalued for a time period for certain insiders to benefit. And eventually that topples or bursts, pops, to use the terminology of the bubble metaphor. if you think of a soap bubble, is a good way to think of it. Because yes, they eventually will pop. It's inevitable. So it's a very good choice of metaphor. So we had these enormous credit-fueled bubbles. There was one between 1995 and 2000, and one between 2003 and 2008. Of course, 2008 is when we had a noticeable financial shift. Now, these bubbles caused brief spikes in labor's share of gross domestic product, but the downtrend resumed once the bubbles popped. So, in this, as I said, this chart had spanned from 1970 to present with this downtrend. Now, one example, just to put it into figures we can all relate to. 2015, for example, the 2015 GDP, okay, gross domestic product for the year, of just everything that we can produce of value in some form. Okay, estimated here at 18 trillion. Now, 42.5% wages, and that comes out to, well, 7.65 trillion. If wages share of GDP was 50%, it would be 9 trillion. Okay, half of 18 trillion, 9 trillion, And it's gone to 42.5. That doesn't maybe sound like much, okay? Going from 50 to 42.5. But I mean, remember, this is money that deserves to go to us, okay? The gross domestic product of everything for the country. If it's equally dispersed relative to, what you can get for your dollar, then yeah, you should be getting the same 50% that you were getting back in 1950. And this chart is showing that the difference had gone to 1.35 trillion, which comes out to 13,500 per household. All right. Now, I mean, I'm sure the average household for the year could benefit, could have things vary significantly from $13,500. I know that my household couldn't yours? Yeah. I mean, they love to distort these figures. Even the definition of middle class is getting ridiculous. I mean, you'll see upper limits for the definition of middle class now that a large amount of people would disagree with. Or I mean the low end, for that matter, most people would disagree with. What it is required for you to be considered middle class now is starting to become an astronomical number. Now they want it to reflect their system, make it look like everything's okay except for you. You out there are maybe poor because you made bad decisions in life, but everything is fine for all these other people. I mean, that's what they like to project as the way things are. And you don't really get to see, unless you're in, well, I mean, a lot of people in certain lines of work, they get to see a lot more than others. I've done a lot of work with delivery, for example, in my time, and you really do get to see how there is a disappearing middle class. You're either delivering to very well off people in one manner or another, depending on the type of residence they prefer, or people who are really just kind of scraping by. Low class, working class kind of merges together these days, and a middle class gradually kind of disappears from our communities as the years go on. When you look back to generations before us, like the baby boomers, grew up in a time slightly before my generation. I'd say I'm slightly older than the children of the boomers. I'm like maybe a fraction of a generation past the boomers myself. But it really is a big amount of money when you look at $13,500 per household per year. And there's no justification for this because, like I said, the people at the top are still making profits relative to productivity of the country. But, the average working class is not getting it anymore. That can make or break for a lot of people, I would say, whether they're just scraping by or almost not that at points, or whether they can at least feel a little bit less anxiety that things will be taken care of from month to month. And so, yeah, I mean, these are really disturbing figures here. I mean, that's significant for the average person, yet they want you to believe that is pennies to the average person. And yeah, it's just you in poverty. And we're hearing talk that this housing bubble is back. One big departure from 2007, that now it's a constellation of bubbles, including government bonds and equities. Now, the government will try to buy the debt, basically. It sounds ridiculous, but it is, in essence, what happens in a lot of these situations. A funny thing often occurs after a mania-fueled asset bubble pops. An echo bubble inflates a few years later as monetary authorities and all the institutions that depend on rising asset valuations go all in to reflate the crushed asset class. And these figures are based, this particular set of figures is based on a chart spanning 1990 to 2017, the Case-Shiller home price index charts. And you can see the exact same shape of just all of the points along the valuation shift. You can see what's coming, folks, basically, okay? I mean, we had something happen in 2008, to put it in layman's terms, and we're about to see the aftershock, which is actually going to probably be a bit stronger than the initial. Now, these people would like, you to question, is an asset bubble merely in the eye of the beholder? And this is what the multitude of monetary authorities, central banks, realty, industry analysts, etc., are claiming. It's in their best interests, of course. Perception is what they need to hold on to a little longer, controlling that narrative of perception of the monetary system. They're claiming there's no bubble here, just a normal market in action. Okay? Now this, as I said, it's self-serving justification. A bubble isn't a bubble because we need soaring asset prices. It ignores the telltale characteristics of bubbles. Even a cursory glance at these charts reveals various characteristics of bubbles. A steep, sustained liftoff, okay, a defined peak, and then a sharp decline that retraces much of or the bubble's entire rise, and a symmetrical duration of the time needed to inflate and deflate the bubble extremes. So, I mean, it's a typical pattern for people who have, spent time in this subject. Anyone who's in economics or finance, could confirm this to you. And it happens all the time. And a lot of these markets is the thing. It seems housing bubbles take about 5 to 6 years to reach their bubble peaks, and about half that time to retrace much or all of the gains. So if it takes about 6 years and the rise, it'll be about 3 years on the fall for like 9-year duration. If that's what you're talking about for the full bubble, that would be an example of an average bubble. These bubbles have a habit of overshooting on the downside when they finally burst. This helps explain how debt is being bought up. Remember, I was talking about buying debt, the government buying debt. The Federal Reserve acted quickly in 2009, 2010 to reinflate the housing bubble. They do this by lowering interest rates to near zero and buying over 1 trillion of mortgage-backed securities. Okay, so they're buying this up. They're artificially raising the value, because when a lot of people are buying something, it's a hot item. It's more popular. It's suddenly perceived. This is about perception. It's suddenly perceived as being valued at more than it previously was. So you'll have these people who can control the currency, the Federal Reserve, who can go in there and they can say, okay, well, we're going to make this easy for us to purchase and make it more valuable in the proceeds. Now, if that isn't the most extreme example of insider trading, I don't know what is. Okay? But when the Federal Reserve does it, it's considered legal. It's not legal. It's completely illegal. It even goes against the Constitution. Okay? These private central banks, they are an abomination. Andrew Jackson knew that and got rid of them. There was an attempt on his life that was unsuccessful. Now, unfortunately, when John F. Kennedy issued a debt-free greenback to help the economy, he wasn't as fortunate. But it just shows how this is the ultimate battle. Okay, in my mind, the bankers, this is the ultimate battle. I mean, the amount that we should have to work per week, okay, for our contribution to the system is so minuscule compared to what we do now. And you'd be surprised how well off we could live, all of us, from what we have here. I mean, the increase in productivity as the human race is astronomical compared to the meager lifestyle that we all are subjected to by this. It's true indentured servitude. And I don't know, I may go so far as to say it's all out slavery of the majority of the population. Okay? I mean, if we were all just back to a Stone Age where we were all just hunting in the woods for our food for the day and then sleeping by a fire, and we each had to do that, that means they would too. That means these private bankers would have to do that too. I'm sure most of them, they'd be ready to call it quits in a few days. So I mean, they're not willing to put in their equal share toward anything, these people. And that's what's so disgusting about it. I mean, it's our unwillingness to touch the topic of finance, economics, not want to have anything to do with it, be intimidated by it. That's too complicated. I'm not, just like law, lawyers and lawfare is what it is because not enough people get involved. It's set up to be intimidating so that you don't even try to compete. But it's actually not that intimidating. And these things can be overcome. Civilizations can be reset by the masses. And we are becoming a society with such an extreme in this regard that it can very easily experience that reset. I mean, the amount of pressure, you put on people's lives, I think can affect how much they are willing to get involved. People living too comfortably won't do anything to change a system that's corrupt. So I like to look at all of this in a positive, enlightened, knowledge is power sort of way. I really don't think that's a cliche at all. I think it's underemployed as a philosophy. But as I said, the Federal Reserve did act quickly in 2009, 2010 to reinflate the housing bubble, lowering interest rates to near zero, buying over 1 trillion mortgage-backed securities. And when bubbles are followed by echo bubbles, as I said, the bursting of the second bubble tends to signal an end. Or maybe I didn't really mention this, but I mean, the second bubble tends to signal an end of the speculative cycle. It sort of, for that asset at least, does create a momentary reset where the true value can be employed once again for a time at least. What it's worth in that day and age, basically, whatever commodity you're talking about, a toaster, a juice machine, it doesn't matter what the object is. In this case, we're talking about the housing market. So it's just the overvalued housing market. In America, some of the most extremes of that would be, well, most notably San Francisco and New York City at the moment. I mean, the rent is astronomical for, a tiny, tiny little box of a studio apartment. And there's no justification for this. There's really not. But this is all speculation. What people do or do not think things are worth, and how many people are buying out there shares of a given commodity, asset, whatever, is what sets its value at the moment. And therefore, you're like, well, wow, it sounds like it's pretty easy to manipulate the stock market. Well, the answer to that is yes, it is. It's it's just a ridiculous system designed for criminals, and it really, to a large extent, shouldn't even exist. I mean, the amount of regulations that could be employed that are not to prevent these sort of things from happening, it wouldn't be all that difficult. I could sit down with a few economists and get them to do what I need. It's not that difficult, but they don't want that done. You see, they like to be able to manipulate their system. And governments bow down to these bankers because it's over their heads, I mean, hey, I'm in politics. I'm into being a good actor and fooling the people with what I have to say when I get up there, but I don't want to deal with mathematics and economics, So it's very easy for the bankers to manipulate government, political, and governmental types because that they don't really try to grasp these concepts. And it's, as I said, it's relatively easy to understand a lot of these things if you just give it a little patience and a bit of an open mind. Really, it's really not that complicated. It can be tedious, it could take a bit of time, but it's actually all too simple. It can frustrate you when you see how much corruption is actually being done. You can be like, my God, and you just want to go out there and, I don't know, plant a few bombs in some private central bankers' homes or something, and then you come back to reality and you say, that won't change anything. But something needs to be done to educate the masses, So I find myself in front of this microphone, and we're back to the present. But yeah, it is a topic that we should just get a little more savvy on. And, more of us do that, it'll be a chain reaction. Within a few generations, this stuff won't be able to happen anymore. Maybe that doesn't sound good enough to a lot of you, You want change you can experience now. At least those of you who do plan to continue families, have children, grandchildren, and the like. This has to at least appeal to you a little bit. If you can at least start a change and an awareness, a consciousness, financially uncorruptible because of your level of competence on the topic, for your grandchildren, great-grandchildren at least, it's worth contributing to, right? Just a little at least, just a little, Could be at the bar once in a while, just talking with a couple people about a couple of these concepts, and then go back to whatever else you were discussing, and it'll catch on. I'm telling you. I'm not expecting a mass change at any one point, place, or time, but yeah, as I said, we just need to become aware of this as a whole. Humanity needs to be unable to be duped in the future the way we are in the current day. This is pathetic. It's really pathetic. And yeah, but when these echo bubbles follow the initial bubbles, the bursting of the second bubble, the echo bubble, as it were, tends to signal the end of the speculative cycle in that asset class. And there's no fundamental reason why, in this case, housing could not round trip to levels below the 2011 post bubble. So, I mean, yeah, it could be valued at or less than where things were when all of this manipulation began, at the start of the, before the start of the first bubble, even, or less. But yeah, I mean, when you have governments, and even worse, these private central banks determining the value of currency by determining the interest rates, deciding, to buy up these government bonds, it's just a way of manipulating the value. I mean, they're making sure that the richest people will not become poor. And they're making sure that the rest of us cannot get that reset we all need. That's what they're doing when they do these buying ups of assets to change the price. I mean, any meddling by the Federal Reserve or the governments, for that matter. And it really is unjustified spending of our money. We need to stop thinking of the government and us as the same thing. That's another big flaw that we need to rid ourselves of. People look at all of the international war crimes that America is guilty of with these puppet regimes that we're installing all over the planet, and we look at people in other countries who, we feel ashamed when we speak to these people. We shouldn't. As American citizens, we know about the crimes of our government. We don't approve of them, and we are not synonymous with the American government, which has gone rogue and has been going more and more rogue as time goes on. And it's completely off the reservation. I mean, it's going against the Constitutional Bill of Rights, going against the will and best interests of its citizens. And the time has come where it needs to just collapse. Basically, we already see so much infighting right now in politics and in government, which is exactly what was happening in the Soviet Union just before it collapsed. I mean, we're seeing outward infighting. It's not even being hidden, just like we saw then. I mean, these are clear indications of a government that is about to fail. And this time, in this particular situation, it's very clear to me, in all my research at least, that this is not the government, or this is not the country, rather, that my grandfather immigrated to so long ago from Poland. This is not that country that my maternal grandfather was born into. This is not even the country that my parents were born in, because it has changed even in one generation, 1.5 generations, so extremely. And when you talk about 2 generations, like I am before myself, you just can't even compare, because just so much has shifted during that time period. Now, some of these plans were in place then. All right, earlier part of the 20th century did already have a lot of these plans in the works, but we didn't really, as a nation, see and have the impact of its effects yet, in those days. So it wasn't possible to fight against these forces then, in a sense, because we had no evidence to really know they existed. And I mean, we didn't even have whistleblowers with books, so certainly not the internet back in the eras that I'm referring to there. I mean, 20s, 30s, 40s, even 50s, most people trusted their government completely. It was very easy for government propaganda to run very smoothly. We've had a strong shift from that. We need to hold on to the freedom of our internet first and foremost, and take control of the financial ongoings of the globe, and that could really be our salvation. I mean, that's really one way that we'll always be enslaved if we don't become better educated, more knowledgeable of what's actually going on. It's really the easiest way for us to be duped, as I said, because no one wants to discuss economics. No one wants to deal with, anything related to mathematics. And so we're setting ourselves up right there already to be victims. I have a few other charts I was looking over the last few days here and preparing for this. And there's a couple more with some interesting statistics I would like to share a bit. U.S. debt in all sectors is shown on this one. And it's analyzed quite well. And the general sectors of the U.S. debt is split into, okay, for those who might be curious. And this is based on Federal Reserve data, by the way. And we have the federal sectors, and we have the U.S. debt sectors as government, financial, business, and household debt. And this chart, in this case, is spanning from 1947 until 2011. Okay? The financial sector begins to get too big for the well-being of the citizens as a whole during about the 1990s. Okay, that's the financial sector. It starts to get too big for its britches around the 1990s. And from around 2007 onwards, we see the financial sector taking a far greater share than any other sector. Okay, this is more than government, more than business, more than household debt. And so it stands to reason, of course, that, the real heavy manipulation in the financial sector really got interesting and fun for the bankers, so to speak, around 2007 onwards. Now, of course, right after that, we had 2008, didn't we? Oh, I guess that shouldn't have been a surprise. It didn't take them long. Getting really crazy with the financial debt before we had some whoopsies, so to speak. And government begins to, as far as the governmental sector, okay, the government begins to take far too large a share for its own good around 2005. Okay. Now, we've had an issue of an ever-increasing big government for a while now. The military industrial complex is something that we were warned about years ago. Now, we've had whistleblowers from the past, such as William Cooper, pointed out a lot of interesting information about how out of control the military industrial complex has become. And a lot of the data that he's provided is one good example of that. But so it was clear from a lot of this information that these projects were getting significantly large by the 60s and 70s. By the 80s and into the dawn of the 90s, though, it was really, really getting big money, big business, considerably more than in the past. And in the time since Bill Cooper's passing, of course, here in the 2000s, well, we've had these ongoing wars. Come on. I mean, ever since we went into Iraq back in the early 90s, really, these things have been ramped up and for the most part staying there as far as continuous justification for this military industrial complex budget. We have this big concern now, of course. I mean, so government begins in these figures here, of course, government begins to take far too large a share for our own good around 2005. 2005, okay? This point is notably a few years after the 9/11 Israeli-U.S. false flag for the Middle Eastern never-ending war on terror, and a few years before this Greater Depression's initial 2008 introductory crash. So it is significant where big government really starts to go out of control with their debt and just making things worse, adding fuel to the fire from any of our perspective. But, from their perspective, this is about their survival, the war hawks, the warmongers. And war is good business for these people. Control of the citizens is accomplished through war for their mentality as well. This is the way they think, these people. It's really, really frustrating at times, I swear. It can be rough to just take a breath once in a while, Yeah. When you really look at the scale at which we are screwed over is really the best way to put it. As everyday working class citizens. And the U.S. went from a creditor nation to a debtor nation. From one who issues credit, gives out loans, to being in debt, a debtor to others. So the U.S. went from a creditor nation to a debtor nation. Now, we're not surprised at this point, of course, by this fact, right? I mean, come on, we've seen that electronic sign. Where is it, in New York or something? It would show the national debt. It was an electronic sign that could be reflective with, reflect current changes. And they just got to a point where they stopped updating the thing. I remember that. And that was very telling, I think, when that happened. Because it's like, okay, these people know that they really shouldn't even be giving us this information anymore if they want to stick around any longer, or even shouldn't even be there this long, for that matter. Okay, but when did this happen? This shift, the U.S. going from a creditor nation to a debtor nation, this shift began in 1971. Now, this didn't just suddenly happen for no reason, though, okay? A significant point to make is that this was the ending of the Bretton Woods agreements. And, we can see significantly how much debt we started taking on, and more as years went on. From this one chart I have here is a U.S. merchandise trade balance. And this covers all the way from 1895 to 2015. And smack right at 1971, the ending of the Bretton Woods agreements, and that's where we go from being a creditor nation to a debtor nation. Now, for those of you who are not familiar, the Bretton Woods agreements, these forced trade with U.S. currency internationally. Okay, they forced just a lot of things to be dealt with a lot of commodities to be dealt with in U.S. dollars. Okay, so if you're some other country dealing with some other country, you still have to use U.S. dollars for your transaction. Okay, now obviously, so then even though it's currency, it's still considered a commodity that you're purchasing. Okay, so you're buying this currency for your transactions. Okay, now what did we mention earlier about how much people are buying of a commodity? Well, that raises the speculative value, right? The projected value, the perceived value of people as a whole, of the whole market. Okay, so that makes sure that that ensures that the currency is a very high value relative to others, currencies, relative to other things. What the spending power, the buying power is of that currency. You're forcing everyone to be buying it all the time. Okay, so therefore that shouldn't be a factor for what it's worth. But nonetheless, the way this stock market's nature is, the amount something's being purchased determines its value, its wealth. And so there you have it. Okay, we had no trouble then until 1971 making sure that we had a very strong U.S. dollar. The spending power, when you brought home $1 from the factory working all day, covered in soot, you got a lot for that dollar for your family when you got home at the end of the day. Okay, there was at least that. Even if you didn't have those cushy jobs, you knew you had a good spending power with that dollar in the country that you were in and that you were so loyal to, and that you possibly sent your children off to die for in their wars of conquest. Their wars of conquest, of course, were to keep that Bretton Woods agreement in place. But nonetheless, you at least were well taken care of for your family, were well looked after for your hard day's work. And first and foremost, I think that's what we all can't help but, care about the most. Okay? This just gets down to survival. No one can be shamed for any of that. But that's basically what has changed. All right, now suddenly the Federal Reserve, the U.S. government, they need other mechanisms. Okay, and of course that's why you have all these wars. All these little tiny wars that are constantly going on anywhere and everywhere. Where the U.S. claims someone's being aggressive or doesn't have a democratic government or this or that, swoops on in to save the day and make the place a living hell, which it never quite recovers from in most cases. Okay, but what does happen is the hegemony of the U.S. dollar is reestablished in that area of the globe. And that's what it's really about, is making sure that there's a dominance of this currency. So, but what have we been seeing, though? As I've been saying, for the past 35 years or so, okay, all the productivity, all the value for that dollar is buying power. That is staying with the wealthiest people. All right, that's still there for them, but for the rest of us, it's not there anymore. So, we are still citizens of, a corrupt government of conquest, and we're not even getting the rewards of it anymore, as ordinary citizens for the past, they say 35 years or so in a lot of these statistics spans. And, I'm not saying that the wars of conquest, the Bretton Woods Agreement, I'm not agreeing with any of that, okay, of course, but yeah, it's become so bad, that the citizens don't even benefit from the spoils of the country's system, and yet it continues on. Truly now in the realm of a truly oppressive government. Much the way the former Soviet Union was perceived. Except, there's so much propaganda out there from corporate media. Most people would never know it. Oh, they think that they're in the land of the free, home of the brave. And yet, we're having more and more articles out there, analysts pointing out that the American dream, it does now exist in other parts of the world, in other countries. Okay, what has traditionally been defined as the American dream. You can start with a working class background, build a family and a next more educated generation for your children, work a hard day's work for, as many years as required to your retirement age, and have a decent amount to show for it. And, that's not even possible anymore. The jobs aren't there. The spending power of the dollars you earn are no longer there. So, we need to become a lot more aware of a lot of these factors. But there's also a lot of positive things as time goes on. And as I said, the more you become enlightened to a lot of this information, the less you'll freak out, and the more you can reassure the people around you, no matter what happens, no matter what comes your way. You can be a true. A true
capitalist. What? American? Jedi.
That is a good word. Jedi would be excellent.
Jedi.
Yes. And with that, Stephen, I'll retire to my break. Thank you, sir.
You too can be a Jedi. Whoops! I went and muted myself. No, I'm not supposed to mute myself. It's mute you. I can't mute you though. Everybody, you are listening to TruthCat Radio, www.truthcatradio.com. It is Thursday. This is Beyond the Matrix. Graham didn't make it because he got waylaid by a power line or something like that. But anyway, I will be coming up immediately after Richard in about an hour. That would be the Stephen D. Kelly Show. And I'm going to be talking about Comey, celebrating Comey being fired tonight. I'm going to be talking about his what is the word I'm looking for? Resume. I'm going to be talking about his job history and all the wonderful things he did before he got this job that he had in the FBI that he should have never had. Anyway, beyond that, I want to remind everybody that, we are 100% listener supported. That means we are proudly 100% listener supported, and we are happy to say that we go out of our way not to take money from undesirables such as corporations and people that are just greedy, that are trying to sell something, buy this, buy that. But trust me, if something does come along that we think is wonderful, we'll certainly tell you that we think it's wonderful just because we think it's wonderful, not because they're giving us money. But if you do want to help us out financially, and we do need it, it's the PayPal for the station right now is StephenKelly714@gmail.com. That's StevенKelley 714@gmail.com. Anyway, that information is on our main page at www.truthcatradio.com. There's also a chat room. If you have not investigated the chat room, go in there and register a screen name and say hi. And you'd also might consider calling in. And if you'd like to do that, the phone number is 714-598-3125. Okay, that's one of the little things that we pay for, that you help us pay for, is having a phone number that you guys can call in and chat with us. This will be, let's see, after the next show here will be the end of the broadcasting until we come back on Monday. But we just want to ask you, though, if you are listening to the show on YouTube, to please give us a thumbs up and a nice comment and share it with your friends. Okay? And with that, I'm going to go ahead and return it back over to Richard. I probably did not give you enough time, but oh well, such is life. Are you ready? No?
Sort of, yeah.
Sort of? No? Oh, all right.
I'm sure there was that one more thing you wanted to add, Stephen.
No, not really. I'm not in the mood. I'll leave it. Everybody, everyone's all psychic. You guys know. Hey. What? Okay. What do you want me to add? What did I forget?
No. I was just joking.
Okay. Well, I mean, there's always something, but I'm leaving all kinds of stuff out on purpose. So, all right. Back to relaxing. I have to do serious relaxing before I get ready for an hour here.
I understand. Certainly. Okay. Thank you. All right, everyone. Well, welcome back.
What happened to your sound there, Richard? Did you mute yourself?
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. All right. I'm sorry. I'm good there now. Did anyone catch anything, or was that the whole time, Stephen? I'm sorry. Well, everyone. Yes. The time now is 9:06 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's East Coast USA. And you are listening to Beyond the Matrix with Richard Kary here on TruthCat Radio at truthcatradio.com. Before the break, I was discussing the Bretton Woods agreements. And, well, the official description is that these were established for rules of commercial and financial relations among the United States, Canada, Western Europe, Australia, and Japan in the mid 20th century. And, well, they had an exchange rate, basically, and these favored the U.S. dollar in general. I mean, we have a policy now to this day that really has to compensate for the ending of the Bretton Woods Agreement and forcing a lot of countries to trade with the U.S. dollar has been much of what has kept us afloat in spite of how much debt we've been in. All right, just artificially making the U.S. dollar more valuable than other currencies by forcing everyone to purchase the U.S. dollar for their trade, thereby making it seem like, hey, everyone's buying this. It must be really valuable. And so, yeah, you're making it just creating the illusion of it being more valuable, and of course the benefit of that as I've mentioned, these shifts ever since around the 1970s or so have been now going pretty much exclusively to the elite, wealthiest of the wealthy, while the rest of us are no longer experiencing any increases, although the cost of living, of course, has been going up considerably more and more since 1970. I don't think I have to make anyone aware of that or convince anyone of that. Yeah, just bringing up that topic, to someone of an older age, and just brace yourself for the response you'll get as far as how much more the cost of everything has increased, based on your spending power. And it's a lot of the establishment likes you to believe that it's like, oh well, you're getting higher wages now. It's they want you to think that it's all symmetrical. That it's all lining up, but it's not. And I've mentioned some of these inequalities already. I mean, $13,500 per year for a working class household is a big difference, and for that to shift in the short amount of time that I had pointed out when I was mentioning in the first hour, the just a kind of change in your buying power. That's quite a big difference. Significantly. Now, I mean, if someone is trying to own a home, and you think of the prices homes were a little while back, at least, that's basically a year's worth of mortgage. Maybe not in today's prices, but certainly then. No question. So, whether or not someone is able to afford their own home in the long term, that's, canceling out in the past generation. And that's another thing I don't think I need to convince you of, as how much the shift in home ownership as a goal for the average person as they reach adulthood or are passing through adulthood, for that matter, can or cannot factor in anymore, as a reasonable goal. Owning a home, that used to be a very manageable goal for everyone in the working class, even, for that matter, And today, with student loans adding to things on top of everything else, even people who are college educated in a specific field there are no jobs out there. There's no pay that can match up to their student loan plus supporting themselves. Even to live in an apartment on their own. A lot of these people now are moving back into their parents' home after college because that student loan is now become a manipulative force, which is abusing the market, and it's really immoral. The level to which they've become predators in the student loan world. It's kind of isolated. Really, I'm sure someone could do a whole show on that alone. But no, there are some positive things, though. I was also about to point out when we're leaving the last hour, and yeah, we do have this recent information of Donald Trump firing James Comey. I'm not stealing any thunder from my fellow show hosts. I know Steven is going to be covering this tonight as well, and it's quite a good piece of news, though. James Comey clearly had been covering for Hillary Clinton, preventing an investigation. He listed all the things she did wrong, and then said, we're not going to investigate. And this wasn't his decision to make. That was not his part of his job description all along. But this Trump-Russia collusion story is still really hot in the air. You tell a lie, make it big and loud, and say it often enough, and eventually the people will believe you, right? And so this Trump and Russia. Oh, it must be true, right? Everyone's saying it. No, it's actually not true, and it goes beyond that. I mean, Russia would not be colluding anything. Okay, I mean, these fictitious bad guys these days are just that. I mean, Russia's not looking out to get us. Syria's not looking out to get their own people or anyone else. North Korea is not out to get anyone. Certainly Iran is as peaceful as any nation. I mean, they haven't started a war of aggression in over 200 years in Iran. Okay? Of course, Israel is insistent that they're aggressive and wants them destroyed, wiped off the face of the earth, or chopped up into tiny little manipulable sectors. But we just had Dianne Feinstein and Joe Manson now admitting that there is no evidence of a Trump-Russia collusion. Now, you're not going to hear that story broadcast all over the corporate media, okay? No, they don't. They were going to pretend it didn't happen. They're just going to replay all of the people mentioning, oh, well, it just makes sense, like what she was saying. Feinstein herself was saying, oh, but it just makes sense. I mean, come on. Of course, Trump and Russia, forget about it, right? These people are a joke. They really are. But it is amazing how much the deep state, as the new trending term, I guess, to refer to this, is really controlling the full anti-Trump narrative, anti-Russia narrative, and this is it's just really out in the open. I mean, the rest of the world has the majority in all of their countries seeing America for what it really is. There may be a percentage of Americans who are still buying everything that the corporate media says, but that number is dwindling more and more. But, we've at least had Feinstein and Joe Mason admitting there's no evidence of a Trump-Russia collusion. So I'm at least announcing it for Truth Cat Radio to our listeners to at least spread the news and, do some searches. Don't use Google. I mean, Google's completely compromised, but use a good search engine. DuckDuckGo is the best local example that I could cite at the current that I use. look up a few stories related to this information, share a few links every now and then, and yeah, regarding information like this, where they don't like to let it come out when the discrediting finally occurs, and of course also about these financial matters, sharing those links about a lot of these topics can can really go a long way. I mean, it's a domino effect. It really is. It's a lot of what we're trying to accomplish with Truth Cat Radio is a domino effect. We start the motion, we start the spark that really cannot be stopped once the momentum. That's the word I really wanted, is momentum that really builds in that domino effect. And regarding this whole Russia bashing propaganda as of recent, CrowdStrike, and CrowdStrike, for those who are not familiar, was the so-called computer security firm which claimed Russia hacked the DNC servers and hacked the election. Well, apparently CrowdStrike are so little thought of in their own computer security industry that they were laughed off the stage at ThoughtCon. So, I mean, they're a front, I mean, they're not even a legitimate high quality security, computer security firm. They're a front. From what we can see evidence or proof of, it may or may not only consist of one quirky looking gentleman. But yeah, I can't say I'm surprised to find this piece of information out. I really can't. After the amount, I mean, for a good amount of years, I've been pretty heavily investigating in much of the independent media, and that's all it takes these days, really, to not be surprised by this level of deception. It's really it's still disturbing. Once it stops being disturbing, we're really in trouble as a people. Something that kind of went under the radar, another little story that went under the radar intentionally from the corporate media, was regarding Jason Chaffetz. Now, I'd like you to do a search for him. As I said, a less compromised search engine like DuckDuckGo would be preferable, but that's Jason, Chaffetz, Chaffetz. And it seems, well, all would seem to indicate that he was quietly forced to step down. He was a House Oversight Committee chair, and it was clear that he was someone who had a lot of integrity, from what we had seen in the past. All right, he seemed like someone who wanted to push through with a lot of these investigations and probes, and it just it was rather sudden, where he just makes this announcement, that he's going to be leaving, and it really seemed like as I said, that he was given an offer he just couldn't refuse, so to speak. So yeah, look up Jason Chaffetz, look up CrowdStrike, laughed off the stage at ThoughtCon, share all these links and stories with people. All right. And Dianne Feinstein admitting that no, there's no evidence they have of the Trump-Russia collusion. That's a good one as well. Okay. We need to get a lot of this information out there to people, a lot more. There was supposed proof that France had for a while there that Assad used sarin on his own people. And remember, we were told 2 times in a handful of years in the past that Assad used this gas on his own people. It was disproven already in the past. In the cleanup, they weren't using protective gear. It was obvious sarin gas wasn't even there. All right, whatever they used for their staging of this attack. But you got to look for what is not there and should be. Look what should be there and isn't. And this Assad using sarin gas, I mean, everything is going well for him in negotiations with the West. Okay. He's finally getting all these sanctions removed and a lot of things sorted out where this war might be just, fizzling out and, U.S. are done trying to meddle. And it's because politically, on the world stage, they had used up all their cards, it seemed, and he has visitors. Okay, he has diplomatic visitors, and he's suddenly going to gas his own people in an attack while they're present, while they're there visiting. I mean, it's how could it not be obvious to anyone that there is completely no motive for him to do this? No, he did not do this. Even if he were evil, he wouldn't do this. There's nothing that can be gained from this. And it's just a ridiculous fabrication, like so many that we're getting these days from the military-industrial complex. But for a while there, France claimed they had so-called proof that Assad used sarin gas, and that turned out to be complete BS. And it's just the whole philosophy of propaganda. That these people are. That's all they have left now. It's just tell a lie, make it loud, make it big, make sure it's a big lie. Tell it often enough, and eventually it'll stick. That's about all the strategy is toward deceiving the American people. And it seems the government's completely given up on fooling the rest of the world. They even seem like they're about to give up on fooling the American people. The amount that we're turning to independent media. Anyone who really wants to know what the news is, at least, has been turning so much more to the independent media. The government is kind of even giving up on fooling its own citizens. They just go through the motions. Say what they need to on CNN and CBS, ABC, and all this. Just to make keep up appearances, as it were, right? There was an interesting story covering my hometown. I just noticed. Actually, I'm based in Chicago, and I've lived here my whole life. In the city. Not in the suburbs. So I mean, I'm aware of the city. I'm not someone who's intimidated easily, and I've lived all around the different neighborhoods. I've lived downtown in a very upscale business sector, and I've lived in various other neighborhoods, and I've dealt with many areas having done a lot of delivery as well. I've dealt with any and every type of area, neighborhood type of person. So I don't intimidate that easily, but I do know my city. I do know Chicago. So I always find it interesting when you have any kind of information or stories, about somewhere that's close to home, so to speak, something you're quite familiar with. You want to see how accurate it is, right? Based on at least what you do know. And in this story here, there's some accuracy, some not. Thousands flee Chicago for safer areas of the country as America's third largest city becomes a gang-infested wasteland. This is the title of the article, okay? I've actually I've seen this in multiple stories, a slightly different article variation, but some of the story has some accurate, statistics. The impression it gives to someone who's never been anywhere near Chicago, never known anyone from Chicago, though, would be completely inaccurate at the same time. Now, this article is talking about a lot of people who have recently moved, abandoned the city, left. It's referring to it in a word like wasteland. I was not aware of this. I'll be honest, I was not aware of this. I mean, I'm fully familiar with my city and a lot of different neighborhoods, and it's not like it's not like anyone who's here would notice something like that when you're in such a large, dense population. You know, I mean, no, there aren't vacancies everywhere. I mean, the places where there may be vacancies that you'd notice would be in the richest and poorest. Okay. But nothing that the average person who does their daily, routine anywhere in any of the streets of any of the neighborhoods, for the most part, would really notice. I mean, everything's populated enough in most areas, and most areas are relatively safe. I mean, yeah, it would be good for us all to be able to carry and conceal, just like Texas, an armed population. It brings down the crime rate. It brings down the crime rate like that. Okay? And that's been proven again and again places. So, I mean, the only people with the guns at Chicago are the criminals in the low-income areas. Of course, that's where all of the crime and murder occurs for the most part. I mean, you have a bit in other areas, but, it's usually people who are related to criminal behavior, gang activity, someone who's just loitering around looking for interaction. I won't say looking for trouble, but, it's usually involving people loitering around and or looking for at least some sort of interaction with others, people who are just, doing their job. What if they're a cab driver, a delivery person, just passing through, going home or walking their dog? They're probably, most of the time, they're not going to run into any issues in most neighborhoods, though. I have to be honest about that, okay? Because I'm out about anywhere and everywhere in this city every day, and usually if there is a little altercation, I might be having a bad day and a little easy to be triggered, because of frustration, and maybe I just lose it a little too easily with someone on the street who has a problem with something, like people driving, can really irritate each other easily. You'll get the horns blaring when traffic's heavy, but as far as anything serious, I mean, if I don't want to escalate it, if I want to tone it down, it will be able to be. You don't have people robbing everyone every second, and most people can go about their daily routine or whatever they need to do, and it really doesn't seem like a town that's that dire. But yeah, once again, this title here, I mean, that's my testimony, but then you have this title: Thousands flee Chicago for safer areas of the country as America's third largest city becomes a gang-infested wasteland. But so yeah, that title, I think, is one of the most misleading things about the whole article. But some of its statistics I give the benefit of the doubt to. Like I said, as far as vacant areas, there is an extraordinary amount in the poorest areas. It seems like a lot of this city's south side tends to self-segregate as well, and a lot of the lowest income areas do tend to be on that south side there. There's a bit of a west side to Chicago, right down the center, that's very low income as well, and you will see large amounts of vacancies in those areas. But this city is enormous. And if you just look on a map, so you'll have plenty of other sectors to the city. So many so that you might think they are the entire city and forget the ones I just mentioned. Those parts even exist. It's a very large city. Nonetheless, those are significantly large areas as well, especially the southeast quadrant. Considerably large. That is uniformly very low income and poverty type areas. But you have to take each piece of information for what it is, and definitely get multiple sources for a lot of this, though. Because like me being one person who lives here, at least I can give this comparison to some of this information. Now, some of the other data in this article mentions the number of murders increased by almost 60% in the city of Chicago last year. Okay, so in this past year, Chicago saw a 60% increase in murders. Like, that is something that, once again, I myself might not have been aware of, just to put it in perspective, but those are the statistics nonetheless. A staggering 9.5 million people live in the Chicago metropolitan area. When your murder rate goes up double digits in the same year, in a single year, you've got a problem there alone, clearly. But when it goes up by close to 60%, then it's safe to say you've got a catastrophe on your hands, okay? So, yeah, Chicago's in danger in the long term of having this really spiral into a city that just completely disintegrates into just deterioration, basically. I mean, closer to what we've seen from Detroit, city limits at current, or what Baltimore has been becoming as close to for Chicago's near future. If things continue, you have to imagine it eventually may spread more and more out of the concentrated neighborhoods that this is in, consuming eventually the entire city. This is a possibility for at least a portion of the city, a good portion. Because, I mean, Detroit, I know from people who've lived there, the downtown area will have people commute to for the 9-to-5 work week, and then they'll leave it, and otherwise they're living and spending their time in the suburbs surrounding the city. And most of that city that's surrounding that downtown area is very low income, and it's very high crime, relatively speaking. Now, 2016, the number of murders, and this is Chicago we're talking about again here. In 2016, the number of murders in the city of Chicago jumped nearly 60%. So this is jumping nearly 60%, pushing it to over 760. And that's more than New York and Los Angeles combined. There were more than 4,300 shooting victims in the city last year in Chicago, according to police. That's shooting victims, but not necessarily dying, okay? 4,300 in Chicago last year. But this is police statistics, but, I mean, a number like that, there are police budgets to consider, but some of these statistics I'm more willing to believe from the local police source than others. That one I could take for face value. It's not that significant either way. The large picture here of grand scheme of things is what I'm trying to get across to people here. Net domestic migration. Now, this is moving on regarding Chicago. In the article, the net domestic migration from the Chicago metropolitan area was a staggering 89,000 during 2016. Okay? So the amount of people who relocated, moved out of Chicago and went somewhere else, who had been living here, 89,000 people during 2016. Now, metropolitan area, they don't make too clear if that's just Chicago or Chicago and surrounding suburbs. I, at first guess, would have to wager that it's including surrounding suburbs to get a figure like 89,000, because once again, this is not something that I was aware of. Okay? I did not realize that during 2016, 89,000 people migrated from the Chicago metropolitan area elsewhere. So, if that statistic is accurate, it's clearly covering a lot of surrounding suburbs as well. But still, 89,000 is a very large number, and it's significant. It's significant, these densely populated areas. It's a globalist goal, but they're not going to get people to stay in and concentrate more and more to these hubs around the globe. People are going to spread out naturally in time because they're going to see it works out better for them. So I really think that the goals will ultimately fail by human nature knowing better. I'm not a very good example. I mean, I currently am employed by a means where it's beneficial to be around a largely populated area. I haven't done much in the way of self-sustaining. A lot of factors, I mean, I depend on, for all of the things I eat, a lot of my products I use, and that, I mean, I depend so much on the stores, the corporations. I'd like to see more of us become more self-sufficient in the future, of communities that can break away from the system more and more. And get away from the most densely populated areas. Like I said, I have to start practicing what I preach, but maybe in my lifetime I'll be part of this movement. But it's necessary. We need another revival of sorts. Spiritual can enter into it as well, but we do also need a revival in how to live best for humanity. And this corporate culture is swallowing our humanity, devouring our humanity. That needs to change, and we could use to not put it off any more generations. I'll just say that. But that's the statistic here. Chicago metropolitan area saw 89,000 people relocate in 2016 elsewhere. And in particular, wealthy people are living in cities, leaving the cities in droves. It's claiming it's about Chicago. I mean, and it's claiming it's happening in other cities, but it is claiming in particular regarding Chicago that the wealthiest people are definitely leaving Chicago at the current time period in large numbers. They are reporting that 3,000 millionaires left the city of Chicago in 2015 alone. Okay? So of the millionaires, I don't know how many millionaires we have in Chicago. Once again, this, I'm guessing, is surrounding suburbs included. Regardless. But they're saying 3,000 millionaires left the city of Chicago in 2015 alone. Well, maybe that's for the benefit of Chicago. I don't know if these millionaires are really going to do us much good. But it does show that they want to live somewhere where conditions are better. So it is indicative of our city and the conditions. I don't plan to stay here forever, I'll tell you right now. So I don't have as much pride as some may in my hometown in the long run. I mean, currently we have a mayor who's a complete Zionist, Rahm Emanuel. And I don't need to stay and the climate is so much of a radical left sort of a city here in Chicago. Rahm Emanuel, he just amplifies that, I don't need to continue to spend my days in that sort of climate atmosphere, It's just I would definitely like to see myself living somewhere else down the road in the future, because Chicago is very, very much a Zionist influenced atmosphere. And as I said, our current mayor, Rahm Emanuel, he only amplifies that. Of course, he's been buddies with Obama. I shouldn't be surprised at the radical leftist nature. No, actually, I don't. Dave, it's Dave Robbins, who was just asking about the millionaires, I take it, who moved away. No, we didn't really have in the article specific details of where they relocated to. I mean, you can only wonder if it were nicer, but just as densely populated cities, or if even the millionaires, are starting to go to the less populated areas. That would be a good question to be curious about. Uh, yeah, and as far as the other people, the rest of the people who have been leaving in general, it doesn't really give any indication one way or another in their data as to what types of areas they move to. But that is a great question, actually. Thank you, Dave, and yeah, I appreciate the feedback there. I did. Let's see, what else did I want to mention about this in particular? Well, I guess just that you have to take a lot of information about local areas with a grain of salt, unless you speak to the people who live there. We had an analyst, Liz Shua, a principal policy analyst for the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, and she was quoted saying, "The figures are of concern for the region's continued economic success." I think that goes without saying, right? Residents often choose to stay in or migrate to a region because of economic opportunity and quality of life, she added. But yeah, of course, they expect us to not talk about the fact that this is quietly happening in communities all over America, which is just I guess considered more politically correct to just not describe, because then they would want you to talk about the reasons, and they don't want to go into the reasons really. See, I'm just getting another message here from one of our listeners and co-host on TruthCat Radio, Dave Robbins. He's mentioning there have been interesting reports about super rich people moving way out to the sticks. You're totally right. Okay, so yeah, my instincts on that. Dave is confirming a lot of that. Yeah, we are getting quite a lot of wealthy people who are wanting to get away from civilization. Basically, they can see the problems coming in the future. The way this globalist crunch. I like that. Globalist crunch. It's really what they're attempting on humanity, isn't it? But yeah, we're expected to not bring up these topics. Of course, we're not supposed to talk about the fact that this is quietly happening in communities all over America. And this is one of the reasons why there's such a disparity in real estate prices these days. The wealthy, as we're saying, they're willing to pay a substantial premium to live with other wealthy people in areas that are far away from all the violence. That's really what in a lot of cases like this Chicago situation comes down to, I think. I mean, the really wealthy buildings, when I'll do a lot of food deliveries with a lot of the work that I've done, and you'll go to a lot of these really wealthy buildings. The security is just amazing. It's just extraordinary and detailed for a lot of these facilities. Really upscale, high rises. It's clearly I mean, these are some of the wealthiest high rises in the city, and I'm just amazed at just how these people are living in such a bubble. I mean, they have these little places inside the building that are like community hangout centers, like a computer room or this or that. And you could tell some of these people they'll never leave that property, unless they go to visit a friend or a relative, or go to a certain wealthy, high-end restaurant establishment or function. Dave Robbins was mentioning again, when they start to populate the dumbs is when we need to worry. Yes. Yeah. I can certainly see that. And if violence in our major cities is starting to spiral out of control, while the economy is still relatively stable, what are things going to look like when a complete economic meltdown happens? What a lot of us can't help but wonder is this what this comes down to. That's why these super rich, as Dave has mentioned, interesting reports about super rich people moving way out to the sticks, so we're totally right in assuming such. But it's only a matter of time as I'm saying, I mean, especially if you wind up having complete economic meltdown or even getting closer to it as we are now, it's only a matter of time before widespread rioting, looting, and civil unrest becomes commonplace in major cities all over the country. With Donald Trump in the White House, some of the more radical far left can even be more infuriated for whatever they have in their minds. Of course, the corporate media fueling that even more, the divisions in America, they're divide and conquer tactics, so then you'll have, these Sorosites, as I might call them, who are, just totally just frustrated and Donald Trump and that doesn't help, just the kind of conditions that the country moves further into. Deep frustration that's been simmering in our inner cities is now reaching a boiling point. It certainly isn't going to make much of a spark necessary. It's not going to take much of a spark to set off a tremendous explosion. So we really have to be aware of just also a lot of what's going on here and what's leading up to what sort of things could be in everyone's mind, because if someone gets angry, you get in an altercation with someone, remember, they might think they're mad at you. You can usually figure out what they're really angry with, and it's not you. So don't go there, get out of that altercation, put your energy into something else, maybe even enlighten that person, get on each other's side, because that's one thing you don't want to do is waste this energy in the wrong way. I can't tell you. I mean, I've been there myself, so I can speak from one who knows that there are a lot of ways you can use that energy, and some are not productive. And you wind up worse off and needing to reboot and reset more than you originally did if you start going there, basically. And so in anticipation of what is coming, large numbers of Americans have been relocating to less populated portions of the country. And I say good. I mean, that is what we're seeing from some of these charts I've looked at as well, and Dave confirming as well. It is good that there actually are a lot of areas to pick from. We have some statistics here. I know this one is coming, a claim from this gentleman that he goes by Survival Dan. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Survival Dan, but according to Survival Dan, about half of the U.S. population lives in just 146 counties. Okay. So recent U.S. Census data indicates that out of the 3,000 counties in the United States, fully 50% of the population lives in just 146 of those 3,000 counties. Okay. So if you want to have any chance of surviving a widespread catastrophic event by avoiding the hordes, we'll be searching for critical resources in its aftermath. And check out the alternatives, basically. I mean, become aware of some of these areas. I know I've singled out a certain part of the country that looks very promising for just such an incentive and concern. I'm not going to go broadcasting it. I don't need everyone else moving there. But nah, I'm sure that wouldn't happen. But now I have been looking at a certain county in northern Georgia myself. But there are a lot of great areas you folks can consider, certainly. And I've heard a lot of testimonials confirming that this is the right thing for a lot of people. It turns out to be, that is. But you could do more research, get a better idea of the areas you might want to consider relocating and the areas you would want to stay away from, both relocating or in a catastrophe. But there have been a lot of positive confirmations of people who have relocated to less densely populated areas. There's one quote, this person saying they did step out in faith and make a decision to relocate to a new area nearly 6 years ago. And it was one of the best decisions that they had ever made. He's talking about he and his wife. So, yeah, that is promising. Hearing testimonials like that, and it's very clear from the source that this guy wasn't paid to say that. There was no motive. Not that it's that hard to believe when you really think about it. It just comes down to, first of all, you can't focus on jobs that require being in densely populated areas. That's number one, and just means of supporting yourself. Because everything doesn't need to be through money. Let's keep that in mind. But everyone's different. Some people like to live differently than others. Some people don't want to have to make their own everything. If they're different products and this and that, and others are more open to that. But I encourage more people to consider that, incorporated into their future lifestyle. And you'd be surprised at how much of a positive spin, especially when you get into hanging out with other people who do likewise. That's really what I hear really can make all the difference. Actually, not being alone in that lifestyle helps a lot for a lot of people. This television immerses us in a culture of consumerism and waste and dependency. All the things that we need to get away from are reinforced in what you watch on that television. For those who watch it, I myself, it was gradual over a handful of years. But I woke up one day a handful of years ago and I was like, wow, I never watch television anymore. So it can happen, and it can be a positive thing as well to get away from that influence. Usually it'll happen naturally if it does. That's the way I would put it. But it seems that a recent study has found that the majority of working class Americans believe American culture and way of life has deteriorated since the 1950s. We have people saying things have changed so much that I often feel like a stranger in my own country. This is the majority, of the people who've been polled. People believe the American way of life needs to be protected from foreign influence, believe the U.S. is in danger of losing its culture and identity. And a lot feel that a growing number of newcomers from other countries do threaten American culture. It is harder than a lot of the European nations, but we do have a culture and identity here in America, and we can stand by that, I think. I think that there's a good thing for us all to be able to be okay in acknowledging. It's not politically incorrect. No matter what your views may be, we want to hear them, especially here at Truth Cat Radio and Beyond the Matrix. So in the future, I would like, I welcome as much feedback as any of you guys do want to give. And just as empowering ourselves in a lot of ways. There's this one great story I just saw. A homeowner strikes all three men in drive-by shooting outside his home. Intended target of Houston drive-by shooters, fires back and hits all three, killing two and wounding the other. This was a great story, this is really exactly what they don't want you to know about. About 3:30 a.m. Saturday morning, three gentlemen passed by. Evidently, they had a problem with them. Opened fire, 40 rounds they shot at the home in their drive-by shooting. They did not kill the homeowner. The homeowner fires back. Yeah, he kills two and wounds the third. They didn't get it. Not a shot on him with their 40 rounds. Now, he was using an AR-15. That just shows how, we do need to have the same weapons as the government and criminals out there to protect ourselves. If he weren't using an AR-15, if he had a shotgun, he wouldn't have been able to get those people. All right, so yeah, it is a good idea for us all to be armed. And with that, I'll leave you for the night. I think that's a good place to end. Anyway, so I'm glad to finish with such a thought. But stick around for the Stephen D. Kelly Show, and it's a night of celebration. We're glad to see that Comey is no more, and Stephen's going to be filling us in on just why that is a good thing. But I'll be back next week. Thank you, everyone who's listening. Please donate to Truth Cat Radio. And until next week, transcend the construct. Regards.